A lot of developers don't think about skills the right way. The common conception is that skills are functions that you manually call to make things happen, but if you want the agent to always remember something, you put it in your Claude MD or Agents MD. But what if I told you my Agents MD is basically empty, and I completely changed the behavior of Codex to work the way I want it to work just by putting some skills in a folder? I'll show you an example right here, where I have a Codex conversation to implement a new menu item in my app. It went off and did some research, and I want to tell it to go implement this. We see right away that a few interesting things happen. First, because I'm working in a React project, it immediately pulled in skills from Vercel's best practices. It also noticed that it involves a UI change with copy and menu placement, so it used this taste review skill to figure out how to do it better. If you're curious, this is actually prompting Claude just to investigate that part of the task. And after it's done implementing, it noticed there's a review readiness pass to do. So it added some useful dot comments because Codex rarely does dot comments. It simplified its code, and now it's using the test desktop app skill to click around the app before it returns back to me. So at the end, not only am I getting code that works, I'm also getting code that matches the style that I prefer, matches the React guidelines, and I'm also certain actually runs end-to-end since it's able to click around what it built. And all of that happened from a single sentence prompt asking it to add these options to the overflow menu. And this is actually me working on stuff live, looking at this menu. I might ship this. It added correct buttons to open the file in Codex or Claude, and sure enough, it opens in the app and tells me to read the correct file. So how did we pull this off? Did we do some trickery in our Agents MD to tell it to call all of these skills every time I ask it to do something? The answer is no. This is the entirety of my Agents MD. There's just this clause from when I installed one of Matt Pocock's skills, which is unrelated to what I'm doing. I honestly might remove it. A simple note about running build desktop, which I might be able to remove as well, and this one other one about how I like talking to Codex. But none of those flows I showed you about testing, about code quality, end up in here. And that's because with the latest batch of models from both Claude and Codex, especially Codex with GPT 5.6, these models are trained to discover skills in your project and apply them at the correct times without you having to manually specify every little thing that you want to run. I like to think of this sort of like a program that gets written just in time, where all of your skills could be thought of like functions that the agent is available to call. In my case, I have a function to review decisions before it makes them, to simplify and refine its code, and also to test its desktop app. And before, when I was using earlier versions of the models, I had to put all of these function calls directly in my prompt. Otherwise, the agent wouldn't really know to include it. In other words, I was writing a mini computer program every time I prompted these agents, instead of just saying what I wanted. But I've noticed with the latest batch of models that you don't need to write these computer programs anymore. Where whatever I put in a prompt, the agent decides what kind of prompting program it wants to wrap around itself. Like, it may read the documentation for this function and decide this is going to be useful when I implement this prompt. So I'm going to add it to my little program here, and I'm going to execute that along with the rest of my tool calls. And with that, I should probably show you what these skills actually look like. Now, I've mostly been using these skills when using Codex, although skills are just markdown, so if you try these out with the latest Opus or Fable models, they'll work there as well. But I've especially found good luck in Codex with the latest GPT models, with having these skills just get called at the right times. So the first one inside of here is for React best practices. This is one that I installed directly from Vercel using the skills marketplace. If you haven't heard about this, it's honestly not really a marketplace. It's more just if there is a skill available as a GitHub repo, this CLI helps you pull it down. So if you run npx skills add, you can pass in the repo and organization name, and it will look for any skills inside that repository, like the very questionable GStack, or pulling down from Vercel, you can pass in that repository. It'll show you all the options available. And once it's installed or cloned into your skills folder, you're free to modify it however you want. I've just been using their React best practices skill by default, and I've noticed that it's very smart about adding use layout effect in the right places and not abusing use effect as much whenever this is in context. A more interesting one that I added was taste review. So you may have seen a lot of videos around the internet, including my own, about how Claude tends to be better at design decisions, where if it needs to reason about copywriting or how things should be placed in the UI, it tends to do a better job. So I decided, why not just have Codex tap Claude Code on the shoulder whenever it's trying to make a design decision? So this is where the description is a really important part, because looking at our just-in-time computer program, the agent's not going to know to pull things into this program unless it makes sense for the task. And the description is how the agent decides whether it is important. So in this description, I include both what the skill does and also when to use the skill. This honestly could be refined a little bit. It's describing you're going to use Claude Code for taste-driven design. Here are the cases where you might want to reach for it, like UI polish, prose, phrasing, naming and formatting, and use when you would otherwise guess at these decisions. And the body of the skill is always very, very simple. I tend to handwrite my skills whenever possible, just so we're not pulling in too many things into context, and we know that every line is purposeful. Otherwise, if you have an agent write this block, it's going to have a lot of fluff, and you're not going to know what to add or remove. The same way that you wouldn't copy something off of Stack Overflow, right? You also wouldn't want to just copy a skill directly from Claude's output. So here it's telling it to call out to Claude whenever that decision gets made, and I have some extra things in here from trial and error dealing with sandbox permissions. If this skill is useful to you, it's on my GitHub, so you can try it out inside of your Codex setup. And our next one is even simpler. It's about writing code comments, because I've noticed that Codex tends to not leave a lot of comments unless there are comments in the surrounding code, and it also writes in a more mechanical format rather than plain English. So I just said, write some plain English comments that explain why non-obvious code exists. Skip comments that merely restate what the code does. So explain the why, not the what. And there's this other skill. This is my longest standing skill in this repository, which is simplify. I've been using this since the earliest versions of Codex, which used to be very, very verbose, and it's still relevant today, because 5.6 loves writing a lot of code when getting to a solution. And this is, again, where you get into when should you use this? When should you apply it to your just-in-time program? And I'm suggesting you use it whenever your code is ready for human review. So you're ready to hand it back to me, you think it's complete and checked. And here I'm describing it's when the code works and achieves its stated goal, if you deem it necessary, human testing. It could also include more clauses about what simplify does. I might improve this a little bit. But these are the important parts that I landed on. Having the agent always choose shorter names. Another one is combining related concepts. It's very common for agents to have two functions to do the same thing. If there are lib functions that do whatever is being specified, or if it could be inlined, just do that. Always use derived values. This is common. You want to sort of denormalize all of your databases. The same goes for code. And the last one is telling the agent what code to review with the simplify skill. And sometimes I tell it to review all the code in the branch, other times just uncommitted code. You can tweak that one to taste if you want. And I also combined both of these into a single function. That's what you saw get called inside of there, which was review readiness. This is the same way you would do a function wrapper for multiple things you want to do. I've created a wrapper right here saying to use simplify, comments, and then whatever else I might want to add to this anytime it's ready to hand back to me. And the last one is testing the desktop app. This is the kind of skill that I think every repository, at a minimum, should have. Because if the agent doesn't know how to open the app it built and test that it runs appropriately, you're going to constantly copy-paste error messages back from the client console into your prompt box. That is so 2024. You should give the agents the keys to the kingdom to actually open the app, click around, and come back to you once it's working. In my case, I'm building an Electron app, so I'm telling it use it whenever you're inspecting, clicking screenshotting, or verifying anything in the running app. And these are, of course, very specific instructions to my setup. If you're building an Electron app, this might be useful to you. I've created an environment variable to let it bypass some things. It can go into the dev tools there, and I'm not using computer use or anything fancy. This will work with whatever harness you have, like if you're using Pi or Claude Code or whatever else. This is letting it write node scripts inside of the Electron app to screenshot and verify that everything's working. Again, can't stress this enough. Write a skill describing how an agent can test your app. And as soon as these skills start to stack up, you will get more and more refined diffs in your setup. And if you want to just go download all these skills that I've been building out, you certainly can. They're on my repository. But I really encourage you to write all of these skills yourself, since your tastes are probably going to be a bit different, and you're probably going to find corner cases that I did not, depending on the model that you're using and depending on the project that you're building. The simplest way to get started is if you find yourself prompting the agent multiple times to do something, that means you can probably wrap it up in a skill. The same way that you wouldn't want the same code copied 5 times throughout a code base, you probably want to abstract the kinds of prompts that you're writing all the time. For example, I got so tired of copying client console logs back into the prompt box that I figured out a way for the agent to test the desktop app. And yes, I asked the agent to write the initial version of this skill, and in future versions, if it ever hit a wall, I asked it to update with gotchas. For example, when Fable tried to run this skill, it took these notes on its own because Fable loves being Fable. It noticed some issues with like the pixel size when taking a screenshot so that it didn't mess it up twice. And those were applied as diffs onto the skill. To get started, you could actually have an agent trace through your conversations to find opportunities to improve. I just had Codex do this because I just thought to do it. It makes a lot of sense. And while there is some fluff in here for sure, there are some interesting ideas that I might pull out. For example, asking it to look through the system architecture, which I document with some plans and context.md files before it starts working on features. Because I have noticed sometimes it misses this in context. So that would be really cool. It also found some areas based on when I tell it my feedback on comments that I could improve my .comments skill. And that makes a lot of sense. I still have a lot of critiques with the current version that I have. And I'm sure for you, if you don't have as many skills set up or your skills aren't serving you the right way, this audit may be super useful. So with that, I encourage you to go write some skills, at the very basic, a skill on how to test your app end to end. Happy skill writing. I'll see you in the next video.